The deadbolt slid home with a heavy thud, sealing me inside. But Daniel had forgotten that I designed this house. He had no idea the basement beneath us held secrets capable of shattering his perfect life. It took me 10 years to realize my only son just wanted my signature. Today, he locked me in thinking I would panic, but I simply walked downstairs and smiled. This is not a sob story. This is how a 62-year-old woman settles the score. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I am 62 years old. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was not loud, but it resonated through my bones like a judge's gavel hitting the sounding block. Click. That single, mechanical noise defined the end of my role as a mother and the beginning of my role as a prisoner. I stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the brass hardware. My son, Daniel, had just locked the door from the outside. He would tell himself it was for my own safety. He would tell his wife he was doing the responsible thing for his aging, confused mother. But I knew the truth. I turned around and looked at the living room. The house in Maple Ridge, Westbridge, was a beautiful construction of high ceilings and open floor plans, flooded with morning sunlight. It was the kind of home that appeared in magazines, projecting an image of suburban bliss and family harmony. Yet, as I stood there in the center of the Persian rug, the air felt thin. The spaciousness was a lie. The walls seemed to be inching closer, pressing against my chest until it became difficult to draw a full breath. Daniel's voice came through the thick oak of the front door. He was close to the wood, likely leaning his forehead against it, trying to convince himself as much as me. I will be back after the meeting with the lawyer. Mom, he said, his voice muffled, but attempting a calm, soothing tone that made my stomach churn. You just rest. Don't go anywhere. I heard the crunch of his leather dress shoes on the gravel, followed by the heavy slam of his car door. The engine roared to life, and the sound of tires rolling down the driveway faded into the distance. Silence rushed back into the house, heavy and suffocating. I did not scream. I did not run to the window to pound on the glass. I did not throw the expensive vase on the mantelpiece. Instead, I walked slowly to the door and placed my hand on the cold metal of the lock. He had tried to control my schedule for months. He had restricted my access to the car. He had managed my bank accounts. But this was the first time he had physically restricted my freedom. This was the crossing of the Rubicon. The words he had spoken to me earlier that morning, over a breakfast of cold toast and tension, played back in my mind. He had looked at me with eyes that were devoid of the warmth I had nurtured for decades. If you keep being stubborn like this, Mum, I will be forced to petition the court for a long-term care facility placement. At that place, they lock the doors much more professionally than I do. I inhaled deeply, steadying my trembling hands. I reached out and switched off the lamps in the living room, plunging the space into semi-darkness. I did not need the light of their perfect family life anymore. I walked with purpose down the hallway, moving past the kitchen island where my daughter-in-law arranged flowers, and stopped at the narrow door in the corner. It was the door to the basement, a place the family used for storage and rarely visited. I reached into the deep pocket of my grey wool cardigan, my fingers wrapped around a cold, jagged shape. Daniel believed I had lost this set of keys 2 years ago. He thought I was a forgetful old woman who misplaced things due to a declining mind. I pulled the heavy ring out and selected the small brass key with the worn head. I inserted it into the rusty padlock that secured the basement door. It resisted for a moment, then yielded with a sharp snap. I pulled the heavy wooden door open. It groaned on its hinges, a sound of protest from disuse. Immediately, the air from below rushed up to meet me. It did not smell like the vanilla and lavender candles Brooke kept burning upstairs. It smelled of dust, damp concrete, and cold metal. It was the scent of reality. These were two different worlds existing within the same structure. I descended the wooden stairs, the darkness swallowing me. When my feet hit the concrete floor, I reached up and pulled the string of the overhead fixture. The old fluorescent tube flickered once, twice, and then hummed to life, casting a harsh, blue-white light over the room. It was not a storage room for Christmas decorations. The light revealed rows of grey metal filing cabinets, a sturdy steel desk, a heavy iron safe, and a single folding chair. I walked over to the desk and ran my finger along the edge. "You locked the wrong person in, Daniel." The cold, fluorescent hum of the basement lights dragged my mind back 40 years, to a different kind of cold light at St. Helena Hospital. I was 20 years old then, living in a gritty industrial town where the smokestacks stained the sky a permanent grey. My life was a blur of white uniforms and the sharp scent of antiseptic. I worked the graveyard shift because it paid $1.50 more an hour, and we needed every single cent. I could still feel the weight of Daniel as a baby, heavy and warm against my chest in the break room. I used to balance him on one hip while I memorized medical charts with my free hand. I would sit on a hard metal chair, sipping coffee that tasted more like brown water than caffeine, terrified that if I closed my eyes for a second, I would fall asleep and make a mistake that could kill someone. "You are going to burn out, Eleanor." The head nurse, Mrs. Gable, used to tell me, shaking her head as she watched me rock Daniel while reviewing dosage calculations. "You cannot carry the whole world." "I am not carrying the world," I would whisper back, kissing the top of Daniel's head. "Just his world." I had to carry it. Mark Hayes, my husband, was a good man with a wrench in his hand, but he was useless with a bottle in it. He was a mechanic who could fix any engine, yet he could not fix the hole inside himself that he tried to fill with cheap beer. He did not mean to leave us. He just slowly checked out, night after night, until the night he checked out permanently, a highway accident on a rainy Tuesday. Daniel was only 10 years old. Mark left me a small life insurance policy that barely covered the funeral and a mountain of unpaid bills. I stood at the crossroads of grief and poverty. I made my choice. I took on extra shifts. I picked up work at a private clinic on weekends. I sold Mark's beloved pickup truck to pay off the hospital debts so we could keep our small, drafty house. I remembered the winter Daniel turned 12. He woke up screaming, clutching his side. Appendicitis. The roads were icy, and the public hospital was backed up with a flu outbreak. The triage nurse looked at my son, pale and sweating, and then at me. "It will be hours before we get him a bed here," she said. "The private centre across town can take him now, but they require upfront payment." I did not hesitate. I drove through the sleet to a payday lender in a strip mall. I signed a paper for a loan with an interest rate of 300% without blinking. I would have signed away my soul to stop his pain. "It hurts. Mum, make it stop." Daniel had whimpered in the back seat. "I am handling it, baby," I said, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "I am handling it." As Daniel grew, so did my ambition. I went back to school, forcing my tired eyes open to study after 12-hour shifts. I moved from a floor nurse to the emergency room coordinator. The title sounded impressive, but it just meant longer hours and higher stress. Every extra dollar went into a savings account marked Daniel's future. Then came the day that made every sleepless night worth it. The football field at Lincoln High. The sun was blinding as Daniel walked across the stage in his black gown. He found me in the crowd afterward, his face flushed with pride and youth. He hugged me so hard I lost my breath. "I'm going to study law, Mum," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to be a big lawyer. I'll take care of you. I promise." I believed him. I believed him so much that when he got into Crescent State Law School, I sold the only home he had ever known. I took the equity and a chunk of my early retirement fund to pay his tuition. I moved into a cramping apartment with thin walls and a tin roof that rattled when it rained. I sat alone in that apartment many nights, eating instant noodles for dinner to save money on groceries. I would scroll through social media on my phone and see photos Daniel posted from law school mixers. He looked handsome in the suits I bought him, holding a glass of wine, surrounded by smiling friends. He looked like he belonged to a different class of people. I would smile at the screen, swirling my fork in the salty broth. "Eat well, my son," I whispered to the empty room. "It is worth it." After nearly 30 years of lifting heavy patients and standing for 12-hour shifts, my body finally presented the bill. It started as a dull ache in my lower spine and ended with a herniated disc that required emergency surgery. I woke up in a recovery room, not as a nurse, but as a patient. The surgeon, a man young enough to be my son, gave me the news with clinical detachment. He told me that my days of floor nursing were over. Just like that. The career that had defined my existence and paid my bills was gone. My savings began to bleed out. The rent at my apartment in Evergreen Court was eating through my disability checks faster than I could count. I was staring at a bank statement, calculating how many months I had left before I was destitute when Daniel came to visit. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, looking every inch the successful associate at Patterson and Lowry. "Move in with us." "Mom," he said, taking my rough hand in his manicured one. "You spent your whole life taking care of me. Give me a chance to take care of you for a change." I cried. I actually cried tears of gratitude. I moved into their pristine, 2-story house in Maple Ridge a week later. It was a beautiful home, smelling of fresh paint and ambition. Daniel lived there with his wife, Brooke, and my 2 grandchildren, 9-year-old Ella and 6-year-old Mason. Daniel showed me to my room. It was on the ground floor, tucked away down a short hallway next to the garage entrance. "It is better for your back." "Mom," he explained, "no stairs. Plus, it is quiet back here." At first, it felt like a vacation. Brooke bought me a plush, lavender bathrobe and set out fresh towels. The children were delighted to have me there. In the evenings, Ella and Mason would squeeze onto the twin bed beside me, begging for stories from my hospital days. "Tell us about the man who swallowed the fork again." Nana Ellie Mason would giggle. And for a moment, I felt like the matriarch of a happy clan. But the shift in power was subtle, like the slow erosion of a shoreline. I wanted to be useful. I was used to working, to being needed. One afternoon, I stood at the kitchen island, folding a basket of laundry I had found in the dryer. I was humming, happy to contribute. Brooke walked in, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She stopped, her smile tight. "Oh, Mom, please put that down," she said, taking a towel from my hands. "I have a specific way I fold the linens. You just sit, rest. I can handle this house." It sounded like kindness, but it felt like a dismissal. A week later, Daniel sat me down at the dining table. He had a leather folder and a serious expression. "Mom, I have been looking at your finances," he said. "That retirement account is sitting there earning almost zero interest. And with your medical bills, we need to be smart." He proposed that he manage my remaining retirement fund and the small savings account I kept for emergencies. He talked about diversified portfolios and long-term yields. "I can make this money grow. Mum, I can ensure you never have to worry about the cost of future care." I hesitated. That money was my independence, but I looked at my son, the lawyer. He knew this world better than I did. I was just a retired nurse with a bad back. I picked up the pen. "Okay," I said softly, "but this is just to help manage it." "Right. Of course," Daniel said, flashing that charming smile he used in court. "It is a limited power of attorney. Just to move funds for investment. Trust me." I signed. That night, dinner felt like a celebration. We sat around the large mahogany table. Brooke poured a rich red wine. Daniel told a funny story about a judge who fell asleep during a trial. I chimed in with a joke, and everyone laughed. The chandelier sparkled above us. It was the perfect picture of the American dream. Later that evening, I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was quiet. As I passed the living room, I heard Brooke on the phone. Her voice was low, a conspiratorial whisper. "No, it is fine, really," she was saying, followed by a light, airy laugh. "We moved the elliptical out. It is the storage/grandma room now. Honestly, it saves us on childcare. So I guess it is a wash." I stood in the dark hallway, my hand hovering over my aching back. The laughter from dinner suddenly felt very far away. The invisible walls around me began to rise, brick by quiet brick. It started with Brooke's new rules, delivered with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Mum, we really need to stop running the washing machine after 8 at night," she said one Tuesday, standing in the doorway of the laundry room with her arms crossed. The vibration travels right up the pipes. It makes it hard for the kids to settle down. I nodded, folding my heavy nursing scrubs that I still wore as pajamas. Then came the kitchen window. I liked to crack it open to smell the rain, but Brooke would slide it shut the moment I left the room. "The AC is running. Eleanor," she would say, not looking up from her phone. "Electricity rates are up 20% this year. We have to be mindful." Then came the financial squeeze. Daniel sat me down again, his face the picture of weary responsibility. He explained that food costs were rising, and my presence, he used the word situation, was adding to the household bills. He suggested I sign over my monthly Social Security check, which was only $1,200, to their joint account. "It is just to pool resources." "Mum," he said, pouring me a glass of water, "I will give you a cash allowance every week for your personal things. It simplifies everything." I agreed. But the allowance never came. The first week, he forgot. The second week, he patted his pockets and said he would run to the ATM later. By the third week, I stopped asking. The humiliation became physical. I used a strong menthol balm for my back pain, a scent that had comforted me for years. One afternoon, I came home from a walk to find the house filled with the thick, cloying fog of eucalyptus mist. There were diffusers plugged into every outlet. The kids are sensitive to strong odors. Mum, Brooke said when she saw me sniffing the air. Later, I heard her whispering to Mason in the hallway. Don't hug Nana too tight right now. Sweetie, old people carry different germs. We don't want you getting sick. I retreated to my room, feeling like a contagion. The dinner table, once a place of laughter, became a geography of exclusion. Slowly, the settings changed. It was no longer 6 of us. Brooke would set a place for me at the kitchen island at 5:30. It is just so chaotic when the kids eat. She told me, handing me a plate of pasta. This way you can eat in peace and quiet. So I ate alone on a stool that hurt my back, watching from a distance as they sat down at 6 o'clock as a family unit. I was no longer a member. I was a fixture. And then, the fixtures began to vanish. My favourite armchair, a worn velvet wingback where I read the newspaper, disappeared while I was at a doctor's appointment. It was replaced by a sleek, sharp-edged shelving unit with nothing on it but a ceramic vase. Your chair was full of dust mites. Mom, Daniel said when I asked. Brooke was worried about Ella's allergies. My photos, the ones of Daniel in his baseball uniform, of Mark and me at the Grand Canyon, were swept off the mantel and into a plastic bin in my closet. The living room was now a showroom, devoid of my history. The reality of my position became undeniable on a Thursday evening. I was in the kitchen, making tea, when I heard Brooke on FaceTime in the sunroom. I know. Mom, I know, she was saying, her voice shrill. But I cannot keep paying $2,500 a month for this mortgage, plus private school tuition, and then carry the cost of her medications and special food. It is draining us. I stood frozen, the kettle trembling in my hand. I was a line item in a ledger, a deficit. A few nights later, Daniel came home smelling of whiskey. He slumped onto the sofa, loosening his tie. I sat nearby, knitting a scarf I knew no one would wear. It is just temporary stress. Mum, he slurred, rubbing his face. Once I sell the Oak Street house, everything will be easier. We will have breathing room. My needles stopped clicking. The Oak Street house was my first home, the one I had kept as a rental property, the one I explicitly told him was never to be sold because it was my safety net. Sell it, I asked. My voice barely a whisper. Daniel? That is in my name. He waved a dismissive hand and closed his eyes. I waited until his snoring filled the room. Then, I went to my room and pulled out my old leather suitcase. I dug through the bottom lining until I found the file of papers Daniel had made me sign shortly after my back surgery. I was on heavy painkillers then, my mind a fog of opioids and exhaustion. I found it. A deed transfer and a mortgage refinancing agreement for the Oak Street property. And there, at the bottom, was my signature. It was shaky, weak, but it was mine. I remembered him handing me a stack of papers, saying they were just new insurance forms. Just sign here, Mom, and here. It is just for the hospital bills. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the drafty window. Later that night, the house was silent. I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. The wall between my room and the master bedroom was thin. If we don't sell that house. Brooke's whisper drifted through the drywall, sharp as a razor. We are stuck here. But if we sell it, and we move her into that state facility, we can afford the place in Willow Creek, the one with the pool. I know, Daniel whispered back. I am working on it. She is confused. It won't be hard to prove she needs professional care. The tears that had been welling in my eyes for months suddenly dried up. The grief of losing my son's love evaporated, replaced by something harder, something cold and sharp, like the key hidden in my pocket. I was not a mother anymore. I was an obstacle, and I was wide awake. To escape the suffocating silence of the house, I began a new ritual. Every morning, after Daniel and Brooke left for work, I took my cane and walked the 6 blocks to the Maple Ridge Public Library. The walk was painful for my back, but the air outside tasted like freedom. I sat in the back corner near the biography section, pretending to read, but mostly just breathing in a space where no one was calculating the cost of my existence. It was there that I met Marisol Trent. She was a striking woman, perhaps 65, with sharp eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was leading a free workshop in the community room titled Know Your Rights: Navigating the Golden Years. I sat in the back row, clutching my purse. Marisol, I learned later, was a retired state judge who had spent decades on the bench. She spoke with a clarity that cut through the room. She described the exact patterns of financial abuse I was living. She talked about adult children who used medical fragility as a weapon, who coerced parents into signing powers of attorney under the guise of convenience, and who slowly drained assets while claiming to protect them. It was like she had installed a camera in my kitchen. After the session, I waited until the room cleared. I approached her while she was packing up her pamphlets. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I have a question. Just hypothetically. For a friend." Marisol stopped stacking her papers. She looked at me, her gaze dropping to the trembling hands I was trying to hide behind my back, and then up to my tired eyes. She did not smile, but her expression softened into something fierce and protective. "Tell your friend," she said, emphasizing the word, "that the law is a tool, not a trap, but she needs evidence." We sat in a quiet corner of the lobby. Marisol leaned in, her voice low. "You need to write everything down, Eleanor. Every conversation. Every time they ask for money. Every time they deny you access to your own accounts. Keep every receipt. Do not do it to sue them today. Do it so you have choices tomorrow." Guided by her advice, I spent the next week building a secret life. I used a public computer at the library to create an anonymous email account. I brought the few crumpled documents I had managed to salvage from my suitcase and scanned them on the library's machine. I emailed copies to myself, and to a contact Marisol provided a young attorney named Sarah at a small firm called Riverstone Legal Aid. "She is hungry, and she hates bullies," Marisol had told me. I also found my way to the New Hope Church on 4th Street. In the basement, they hosted a group called the Silver Circle. I walked in expecting a prayer circle, but I found a war room. There were a dozen women like me. Women who had been teachers, accountants, and mothers, now reduced to allowances and guest rooms. I listened to their stories. Stories of houses sold out from under them and bank accounts drained by smiling grandchildren. It made my blood run cold, but it also woke me up. I spoke little, but I listened with the intensity of a student. They taught me how to open a bank account online that did not send paper statements to the house. They showed me how to access the county assessor's website to check the status of a property deed. They told me how to request my own medical records directly from the hospital to ensure my chart did not say I was incompetent. One Tuesday afternoon, I returned to the house before Daniel and Brooke arrived. The house was empty. I walked to the kitchen and stared at the narrow door in the corner. For years, The basement had just been a place for the water heater and boxes of Christmas ornaments. I opened the door and flipped the switch. The fluorescent light flickered on, revealing the dusty concrete floor. I walked down the stairs, my cane tapping a steady rhythm. I looked at the dark corners, the sturdy support beams, and the isolation of the space. It was no longer just a storage area. "This will do," I whispered to the empty air. It was not a basement anymore. It was going to be my headquarters. I remembered something Mark told me 40 years ago, back when we were looking at blueprints for a dream house we never got to build. He had pointed to a small square on the basement level near the foundation line. He called it a bulk door, an egress for emergencies that builders often tucked away behind utility machinery. This house in Maple Ridge was a cookie-cutter design, but it followed the same logic. I pushed aside a stack of rotting cardboard boxes and a rusted shelving unit filled with dried-up paint cans. There it was. A low, steel door, half the height of a normal man, caked under layers of beige wall paint. It was seized shut, sealed by years of neglect. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a mechanic like my husband. I walked to the hardware store and paid cash for a paint scraper and a can of industrial lubricant. Every day. While Daniel was at the firm and Brooke was picking up the children, I went to work. I scraped away the paint, inch by inch, careful to catch the flakes in a plastic bag so I left no trace. I oiled the hinges, letting the fluid soak in, waiting, then oiling again. The first time I tried the latch, it groaned loud enough to stop my heart. But it moved. Eventually, I could slide it open silently, revealing a narrow concrete stairwell that led up to the backyard, hidden behind the overgrown hydrangeas. I had my escape route, with the exit secured. I turned the basement into my command center. I set up a folding card table in the shadow of the furnace. On it, I placed an old laptop Marisol had wiped and given to me. It connected to the house Wi-Fi easily. Daniel had never bothered to change the default password printed on the router sticker in the living room. I bought a small, fireproof safe from a flea market for $15. I wedged it behind a heavy metal cabinet where no one would look. Inside, I placed my original birth certificate, the copies of the Oak Street mortgage I had found, and a fresh psychological evaluation from a doctor in the Silver Circle network certifying that I was fully competent. "You need a phone that does not exist," Marisol had said. I followed her instructions. I bought a prepaid flip phone with cash at a convenience store 3 towns over. I kept it turned off, wrapped in a rag inside an old toolbox under my makeshift desk. I only powered it on when I was down there, in the dark. The most terrifying step was the camera. A woman in my support group, a retired private investigator named Joyce, gave it to me. It was a tiny black cube, no bigger than a die. One morning, while dusting the dining room, I nestled it among the fake ivy on top of the china cabinet. It had a perfect view of the table where Daniel and Brooke discussed their finances. Down in the basement, I watched the feed on my laptop. I saw them drinking wine. I heard them. "The nursing home requires a $50,000 deposit," Daniel said one evening, rubbing his temples. "I need that house sold. Brooke, the business loan is due in October." My hands shook as I typed. I started a blog titled Basement Witness. It was anonymous. I wrote about the isolation, the gaslighting, and the financial theft. I changed names and dates, but the pain was real. Writing was the only thing that kept the rage from eating me alive. When Brooke complained loudly about the electricity bill jumping up, I used the distraction to log into the utility portal on my basement laptop. I downloaded the statements. I followed the paper trail. I found transfers from our joint account to a shell company I did not recognize. Daniel was not just managing my money. He was leveraging my assets to cover a high-risk business loan he had taken out to buy into the partnership at his firm. I heard the garage door opener rumble above my head. Daniel was home. I closed the laptop, engaged the lock on the safe, and pushed the paint cans back in front of the secret door. I smoothed my hair and walked up the wooden stairs. By the time I entered the kitchen, I was just Nana Ellie again, washing a teacup with trembling hands, looking a little confused and very harmless. "Hi, Mum," Daniel said, tossing his keys on the counter. "Did you have a good day?" "Oh, just a quiet day," I said, smiling at the son who was planning to sell my life to save his career. "Just very quiet." The storm finally broke on a Friday evening. Daniel came home late, his tie loosened and his eyes carrying a manic sort of exhaustion. He did not go to the refrigerator for a beer as he usually did. Instead, he marched into the dining room where I was setting the table and placed a heavy leather portfolio on the wood. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the little boy who used to run to me with a good report card. Except now, the hunger in his eyes was not for praise. "I have good news." "Mom," he said, his voice vibrating with forced cheer. I pulled some strings. "I got you a spot at Sunset Creek Care Residence. They usually have a 2-year waiting list." Brooke immediately sprang into action. She sat me down and spread a glossy brochure across the placemats. "Look at this." "Mom," she said, tapping a photo of smiling seniors painting in a sunlit atrium. "They have art therapy, a heated pool, and a botanical garden. It is so much better than your room here. You would have a double room with a view of the courtyard." I looked at the pictures. It looked like a hotel, but hotels did not have locks on the outside of the doors. Daniel slid a stack of documents toward me. The paper was thick and cream-colored. "We just need to get the paperwork out of the way," he said, his tone casual, as if asking me to sign for a package. "Just sign here and here. It transfers asset management and medical decisions to me so I can handle the admissions process. I will take care of everything else." I put on my reading glasses. My hand hovered over the pen he offered, but I did not take it. I began to read. I read the bold print, and then I read the fine print. It was a durable power of attorney, granting Daniel full control over all my finances. But there was another document underneath, a lien agreement. It listed my property on Oak Street and Daniel's current house, which I had helped pay for as collateral for the facility fees. I stopped breathing for a moment. If I entered this facility and the fees drained my accounts, the facility had the right to seize the Oak Street house. I looked up at my son. "If you are doing this to take care of me?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Why is your name listed as the primary beneficiary on the deed transfer and the first contact for the liquidation of assets?" Daniel blinked, clearly taken aback that I had read that far. He shifted his weight. "It is just standard legal language. Mum, it protects the estate." "The estate?" I asked. "You mean my life savings?" Brooke cut in, her voice sharp. "Daniel is a lawyer. Eleanor. He understands these things. We are young. We know how to navigate the system. We are doing this for your convenience?" "I am not signing this," I said, pushing the papers back. The air in the room changed instantly. The mask of the concerned son dropped. Daniel slammed his hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. "You have to sign it!" he shouted. "Do you have any idea how much you cost us every month? The food, the medicine, the heating. We are drowning here. Mum. And you are sitting on that Oak Street property like a dragon on a pile of gold. I paid for your law school," I said, my voice rising. "I paid for this house's down payment." "That was years ago," Daniel snapped. "What about now? What if you fall down those stairs tomorrow? What if you have a stroke in the kitchen while we are at work? Sunset Creek is safer. If you stay here, you are a liability." I heard a creak on the stairs. I looked over and saw Ella and Mason peeking through the banister, their eyes wide with fear. Brooke saw them too. She stood up, her face red. "Go upstairs," she screamed at them. "Close your door." Now the children scrambled away, and the slam of their bedroom door echoed like a gunshot. I felt a wave of nausea. I was the reason my grandchildren were terrified in their own home. Daniel leaned over the table, getting right in my face. His breath smelled of coffee and desperation. "You are not signing today." "Fine," he hissed. "But you will sign. The court listens to reason. Mum, and I have seen your medical files. Dr. Evans notes that you are increasingly confused and unable to manage daily tasks." I made sure he noted it. I froze. He had been feeding misinformation to my doctor. He had been building a case for my incompetence for months. You lied to him," I whispered. "I did what I had to do," Daniel said, straightening up and grabbing the papers. "We will try this again tomorrow. And Mum, do not test me." He stormed out of the room, Brooke trailing behind him, shooting me one last look of pure venom. I waited until the house was dark. I waited until I heard the heavy silence of sleep settle over the second floor. Then I moved. I went down to the kitchen, opened the basement door, and locked it behind me. I sat at my card table in the blue glow of the monitor. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. I uploaded the audio recording I had captured on the small device in my pocket. I scanned the documents Daniel had left on the counter in his rage. I attached everything to an email addressed to Sarah at Riverstone Legal Aid and blind copied Marisol. The subject line was 3 words. "They are making their move." I hit send. Then I sat in the dark, listening to the furnace hum. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a hunter waiting for the trap to snap shut. The morning sun that filtered through the living room blinds felt sharp and accusatory. Daniel was waiting for me. He stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid, clutching a piece of paper that shook slightly in his hand. His face was a mask of disbelief that was rapidly hardening into fury. "What is this?" "Mom?" he demanded, his voice tight. "I just got an email from a woman named Sarah at Riverstone Legal Aid. She is asking for clarification regarding the scope of your power of attorney." He waved the paper in the air like a weapon. "Who are these people?" "Some ambulance chasers you met at the library. You are letting strangers whisper poison in your ear, aren't you?" I stood by the entrance to the kitchen, clutching my cane. I did not retreat. I just wanted a second opinion. "Daniel," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I wanted a professional to explain why you think you need control over every cent I own. I never signed a full power of attorney, and I certainly never agreed to put my houses up as collateral." For a split second, the colour drained from his face. He looked like a deer caught in headlights before the instinct to attack took over. "You are ruining us," he shouted. Stepping closer, You are going to bankrupt this family with legal fees because of your paranoia. Do you know how much this hurts me after everything I have done for you?" He turned away, pacing the rug. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number, walking to the far corner of the room. He spoke in a hushed, frantic whisper. I caught fragments of sentences. "She is getting difficult, no. She does not understand we need to accelerate the filing." When he turned back to me, the rage was gone, replaced by a terrifying, condescending pity. It was the look one gives to a child who has broken a vase. "Mom," he said, stepping into my personal space. "You are not thinking clearly. This behavior, it is exactly what Dr. Evans warned us about. You are paranoid. You are confused. I have to protect you from yourself." Brooke hurried downstairs with the children, her eyes darting between us. She sensed the violence in the air. Without a word to me, she ushered Ella and Mason out the front door, the heavy oak slamming behind them. I moved toward the coat rack. It was Tuesday. I always went to the library on Tuesdays. "Where do you think you are going?" Daniel asked. "To the library," I said. He moved faster than I expected. He reached out and snatched my beige wool coat from the hook before I could touch it. He threw it onto the armchair. Then, he reached into the bowl on the console table and grabbed his keys. And then he grabbed mine. "No," he said, his voice soft but edged with steel. "You are not going anywhere today. You are going to stay here and rest until you calm down. No library, no church, no more filling your head with nonsense." He pocketed the keys. "I have to go to the office to fix the mess you made," he said. "I will be back at 5. Do not leave this house." He walked out the door. I heard it shut. Then, I heard the sound that would have terrified a lesser woman. Click, the deadbolt. Then clack, the secondary security latch that we only ever used at night. He had locked me in. He had turned his childhood home into my prison. But he made a mistake. He thought he was locking a confused old lady in with her fears. He did not know he was locking a strategist in with her arsenal. I waited. I stood perfectly still in the hallway until the sound of his engine faded down the street. The silence of the house was absolute. I did not cry. I did not panic. I turned on my heel and walked straight to the kitchen. I opened the basement door, stepped onto the landing, and locked it securely from the inside. I descended the stairs, not with the shuffle of an old woman, but with the purpose of a soldier entering a bunker. I sat at my desk and pulled the toolbox from under the table. I unwrapped the prepaid flip phone and powered it on. The screen glowed with a cheap blue light. I typed a message to Marisol and Sarah. 2 words. Phase 2. Sent. I opened the safe. I took out the USB drive containing the scanned medical records that proved my sanity. I took out the memory card from the camera upstairs. I connected my laptop to the phone's mobile hotspot, bypassing the house Wi-Fi that Daniel might monitor. I logged into the secure portal Riverstone had set up for me. My hands flew across the keyboard, file by file, megabyte by megabyte. I uploaded the truth, the recordings of his threats, the photos of the documents, the proof of his lies. "You want a fight." "Daniel," I whispered to the progress bar on the screen. "I am bringing the war to you." The laptop screen glowed in the dim basement light, illuminating my face as I sat straight in the folding chair. On the screen, Sarah, the attorney from Riverstone, looked at me with intense focus. "Okay, Eleanor, for the record," Sarah said, her voice crisp. Please read the first paragraph of the document on the screen. Then, I need you to count backward from 100 by sevens. The party of the first part hereby agrees to the terms listed herein. I read clearly, my voice steady. Then I took a breath. 100, 93, 86, 79. I did not stumble. I did not pause. Every number was a nail in the coffin of Daniel's argument that I was mentally incompetent. While I was proving my sanity, Marisol was proving my credibility. From her small office, she faxed a sworn affidavit to the court. It was a heavy weapon, a statement from a retired state judge testifying that she had interacted with me multiple times in the past month and found absolutely no evidence of cognitive decline. Sarah moved fast. She filed an emergency ex parte motion with the Westbridge District Court, requesting an immediate freeze on all assets under my name and a temporary restraining order against Daniel's power of attorney, citing credible evidence of financial abuse. At that exact moment, Daniel was sitting in the plush leather chair of the Maple Crest Realty office, 5 miles away. He was uncapping his expensive fountain pen, ready to sign the closing documents for the Oak Street house. He was smiling at the broker, visualizing the check that would clear his business debts. He had no idea that a fax was currently printing in the broker's back office, a court order that would turn his pen into a useless stick. Back in the house, I moved. I pushed the heavy paint cans aside and slid the bolt of the hidden steel door. Thanks to the weeks of oiling, it opened silently. I slipped out into the narrow alleyway behind the house, the cool autumn air hitting my face. I walked fast, pulling my coat tight, moving like a ghost through the neighborhood backstreets until I reached the New Hope Church. A grey sedan was waiting, engine running. Marisol's friend opened the passenger door without a word. 20 minutes later, I walked into the Westbridge courthouse. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. Inside the small hearing room, Judge Harrison, a man who had served on the bench with Marisol years ago, was listening to Daniel's lawyer. Daniel stood next to him, looking solemn and aggrieved. "Your Honor?" Daniel's lawyer was saying, "Mrs. Hayes is in advanced stages of confusion. She's currently safe at home, but she is a danger to her own financial well-being. This emergency guardianship is necessary to..." I pushed the heavy double doors open. They swung wide with a loud thud that silenced the room. "I am not at home," I said, my voice ringing off the wood paneling, "and I am certainly not confused." Daniel spun around. His jaw literally dropped. He looked at me, then at the door, then back at me, as if trying to figure out how a woman he had locked in a house was standing in front of him wearing a wool coat and holding a cane like a scepter. "Mom," he stammered. How did you..." Judge Harrison looked over his spectacles. "Mrs. Hayes, please, step forward." I walked to the plaintiff's table, standing right next to my son. I smelled his expensive cologne, the scent of a man who thought he had already won. "Mrs. Hayes," the judge said, leaning forward. "Do you know where you are? Do you know what day it is I am in the Westbridge District Court?" "Your Honor," I replied, looking the judge in the eye. "It is Friday, October 12th, and I believe my son is currently trying to sell a house on Oak Street that he does not own, using a power of attorney I never intended to give him." Daniel started to protest. She is reciting a script. "Your Honor," Sarah interrupted, plugging her laptop into the courtroom's display system. "If I may, we have video evidence submitted via the emergency portal." The screen on the wall flickered to life. The footage was grainy, taken from the top of my china cabinet, but the audio was crystal clear. If you keep being stubborn like this, Mom, I will be forced to petition the court for a long-term care facility placement. Daniel's voice filled the courtroom. Then Brooke's voice cut in. Con cannot keep paying $2,500 a month. If not sell house, we never buy bigger house. Then the clip of Daniel shouting at the table, You are a liability. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Daniel's face turned a sickly shade of grey. He sank into his chair, unable to look at the screen, unable to look at the judge, and terrifyingly, unable to look at me. Judge Harrison watched the video for a full minute, then paused it. He took off his glasses and looked at Daniel with an expression of cold disgust. The court has seen enough, Judge Harrison said. Motion granted. All accounts held jointly or solely in the name of Eleanor Hayes are frozen effective immediately. The power of attorney is suspended pending a full investigation by Adult Protective Services. Mr. Hayes, you are hereby enjoined from selling, transferring, or encumbering any assets belonging to your mother. Daniel slumped forward, head in his hands. At the house in Maple Ridge, the phone rang. Brooke picked it up, expecting to hear that the house sale had gone through. She listened for 10 seconds. Then she screamed, a raw sound of fury, and swept a crystal wineglass off the counter. It shattered on the floor, exploding into 1,000 pieces, just like their plans. The heavy door of the mediation room clicked shut, leaving just me, Daniel, and our lawyers in the small, sterile space. Daniel sat across from me. For the first time in years, he was not the man holding the keys or the checkbook. He was just a man in a wrinkled suit, staring at the polished mahogany table as if it were a cliff edge. I did not scream. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into my tote bag and pulled out a thick stack of papers. I slid them across the table until they rested under his nose. They were copies of every document he had forged, every loan application he had submitted in my name, and a spreadsheet I had created in the basement. It showed the math clearly if his plan had succeeded. I would have been left with nothing but a bed in a state-subsidized facility, while he lived in a house paid for by my life's work. Do you remember the graveyard shifts at St. Helena? I asked softly. Do you remember the nights I came home smelling of bleach and sickness, just so I could put $50 into your college fund? Do you remember when I sold your father's wedding ring to buy you that laptop for your first year of law school? Daniel looked up, his eyes red and wet. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. I remember. Mom, you stood on that football field and promised you would take care of me. I said, Is this how you keep a promise, by locking me in a house I paid for? Daniel broke. He put his head in his hands and sobbed, a jagged, ugly sound. I was drowning. Mom, the business loan, the interest rates. Brooke kept saying we needed more. I thought I could borrow it and pay it back before you knew. It was just temporary. I swear. I watched him cry. Part of me, the mother part, wanted to reach out and comfort him. But the woman who had been treated like a prisoner stayed in her chair. Pressure does not make you a thief. Daniel, I said, my voice cutting through his sobs. Greed does that, and you chose greed. I nodded to Sarah, my lawyer. She slid a single, crisp document toward him. This is the agreement, I said. You will sign a quitclaim deed returning full ownership of the Maple Ridge house to me. effective immediately. You will agree to the immediate sale of the Oak Street property, with all proceeds going to pay off the debts you incurred in my name. And you, Brooke, and the children will vacate my home within 30 days. Daniel looked at the paper, his hands trembling. 30 days? Mom, where will we go? We can't afford a deposit on a new place right now. That is not my problem, I said, because if you do not sign this right now, I will take this entire file, the forgery, the elder abuse, the fraud, and I will walk it over to the State Bar Association. You will not just lose the house, Daniel. You will lose your license. You will never practice law again. He looked at me, searching for a trace of bluffing. He found none. He realized then that the basement he had ignored, the place he thought was just for old boxes, had actually contained the ammunition to end his life as he knew it. He picked up the pen. His hand shook so hard the signature was barely legible. But it was there. I returned to Maple Ridge an hour later. It was my house again. I walked into the kitchen, unlocked the basement door, and went down one last time. The air was still cold, but it no longer felt like a bunker. I dismantled the camera. I put the files into the safe. I turned off the prepaid phone and dropped it into the trash. I did not need a war room anymore. I turned off the fluorescent light and closed the door. Upstairs, I heard the sound of suitcases being dragged across the hardwood floor. Outside, a moving truck was backing into the driveway. I did not look out the window. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. As the water began to boil, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen island, the head of the table. I took a sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest. Tomorrow, I would write the end of this story in my journal. I would write it for everyone who thinks they are helpless. I would tell them that sometimes, when you are locked in the dark, you don't need a weapon to fight your way out. You just need the truth and the patience to wait for the right moment to use it. Thanks so much for listening to my story, folks. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below and let's get a conversation started. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to subscribe to the Grandma's Family Diary channel. Smash that like button and hit the hype button so we can get this story out to as many people as possible.